Welcome to the first session of Arabic Hour in the new year. I have with me distinguished two scholars, His Excellency Dr. George Khurum, ex-Minister of Finance and professor at the Lebanese University and St. Joseph University and other places, and Dr. Hani Faris, who is also professor of political science at the University of Columbia. We're going to talk today about the challenges, the expectations uh, for the new year, with some connection to a year in review of what had happened in the past. We enter, especially for people in the region of interest to us, are facing incredible challenges. And 2023 does not look to be much different, and promising any hope that things would be better than 2022. And I'm going to let my colleagues start defining these challenges for us. But first and foremost, as you all know, we're going to have a government in Israel that is the most racist and right-wing government ever. And they have already started the opening of the year with some challenges of a provocative visit by Itmar Gavir to the mosque Haram al-Aqsa, and knew, and he should have known, and there is no way one could deny that this is very provocative and could have really ignited some major reactions. Maybe it didn't happen because of the way it was organized early in the morning without any fanfare and very short period, but there is no question that this is going to pass unnoticed. So let me begin and ask our colleague, Dr. George, if you would outline to us what are your concerns that the region is likely to face in 2023?
Well, I don't think there are going to be great changes in the region, except for this unbearable, blind American support for the extreme forms of Zionism, or Zionism in general. But on the other hand, I'm very admirative of the resistance of the Palestinian people. It's absolutely something, I think, not seen since a long time ago in the region. They're not accepting it, they're revolting. I think the Oslo agreements are outdated now, and there were very bad agreements. At the time I wrote a piece called The Peace Process Without Peace. This is how I defined the Oslo agreement. And I was consulted by Leila Shahid at the time. She was with the PLO, and I told her, please don't sign such a document. This is going to stop completely the Palestinian Intifada and gives all the means to the Israelis. But in fact, they went along with it. However, when you see those young Palestinians today, how they fight, how they resist, it's something extraordinary, extraordinary.
There isn't a single day, Dr. George, that we hear of 1, 2, or 3 or more martyrs who have been assassinated by the Israelis in the occupied territories, areas where they are responsible for protecting the civilian population. Dr. Hani, what's your take on things, especially in light of the fact what we have seen in Qatar with the masses, Arab people and their teams have unanimously rejected what was orchestrated and what has been the discourse of the ruling classes. They wanted normalization with Israel, 6 regimes. The masses have shown and have objected to this, and in many respects have demonstrated their rejection. And as you know, some of the surveys that were done, 89% of the people in Morocco do not accept normalization that does not take into account the Palestinians. 88% in the UAE, and numbers going even higher every place else, especially those that do not accept normalization. What's your take, Dr. Hani, about this?
Atif, for a long time, we have known and we were convinced that at a popular level, the issue of Palestine is the primary issue for the Arabs anywhere they are, whether in North Africa, whether in the Gulf, or in the Fertile Crescent area. Unfortunately, the behavior of some regimes in the Arab world and the way they went about normalizing relations with Israel without conditions and without standing for Arab or Palestinian rights gave a wrong impression worldwide. And the Israelis and the Americans tried to utilize this to show, basically, as the argument was made, that there is no interest on the Arab part in the Palestinian issue. It's a gun conclusion that these states simply want to look after their own interests and are willing to work with Israel towards that effect. What the games have shown is that at the popular level, there's nothing as popular as the Palestinian issue and the populace support for the rights of the Palestinians, free Palestine. I've talked to a few colleagues who attended the games, and that's the first thing they said. Whenever they went to a game, the first thing that struck them were the flags of Palestine everywhere in the stadiums, and of people wrapping themselves with the Palestinian flag and going about singing and calling for the freedom of Palestine. It's not, are you amazed when you hear that a French deputy member, parliamentarian of Jewish background, actually made an official statement threatening Morocco that unless the king stands and supports the treaties with Israel and relations with Israel, they're going to take steps which are contrary to the policies of the Moroccan government. So he was threatening Morocco because of Moroccans and Arabs in Qatar calling for the freedom of Palestine. You see how cheap they can be. But nevertheless, as George started, what we have witnessed now is the rise of the most extreme, most right-wing, most racist kind of a group of cabinet in Israel, some of whom were actually convicted of promoting racism and of joining racist, right-wing, fascist, extremist Zionist groups in the West Bank, and especially Ben Gvir and others. So you've seen the first act on their part. If you look at the platform of the cabinet, the first statement is the whole land of Palestine, from the river to the sea, every inch of it, every piece of it, is Jewish and only Jewish. That tells you the kind of platform they have. So you must anticipate a very, very rocky future the next year or two, and a lot of clashes, and things can go out of hand.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
Careful for that.
Absolutely.
So that's on the Palestinian issue. There are other issues which we can discuss, but I think concentrating on the Palestinian issue is the main focus of, should be the main focus of this group.
Now, do you expect, and there is really good reasons, that the situation in the Middle East could very easily deteriorate into violence, or in the Palestinian case, a new intifada, or maybe a tension between Israel, Iran, or Syria. So what are your expectations at the level of violence, given this government that has declared in no equivocal terms its policies that are totally disruptive and non-accommodating, and in many respects so provocative that it's not possible for anybody in the region, even those who have normalized relationship, could live with? So what you think, George, about this?
No, I think that the American policy in the region has been to aggravate instability, to aggravate war between different Arab factions and trends, to subsidize very heavily terrorist groups, especially in Syria, but also in parts of Iraq. If you like, helping the Kurds to become more and more anti-Arab, while the Kurds has always lived with the Arabs without a specific problem. Yeah. They don't want to see Syria to resurrect from the terrible situation it is living, and we know by many sources, and especially by the former Lady Ministry of the US. Her name doesn't come immediately to my mind, but she is the one who said that they have subsidized all the terrorist fanatic Muslim groups. Clinton, Mrs. Clinton, she said it just publicly so many times. It's something absolutely unbelievable.
You see, no question, the issue of Palestine is paramount and is one that galvanizes around it incredible level of support and emotions that unite all the people of the region around. Hani, you alluded to that this is one crucial question, but there are other problems. One of the major problems in my mind is the economic situation. Lebanon is on the brink of collapse, if not collapse, and the challenges it faces are not just purely endogenously made, internally made. Syria is exactly the situation. It seems like, particularly the United States, has taken a position to make the people in the region hungry, to make them economically suffer. In some sense, Jordan was willing to sell extra electricity, is able to produce, and had the capacity to do so. The American vetoed this, did not allow them. To what extent is this policy totally injurious to the long-term interest of the United States? How on earth is the United States going to defend the proposition of keeping Syria in such a state of turmoil of keeping it totally unable to reconstruct, rehabilitate, reconstitute? To what extent is the US watching and hoping and maybe instigating the collapse of the Lebanese economy?
Atif,
Well, I will remind that we have two main actors in Lebanon. One is Saudi Arabia, the other one is France. Today you have these two countries that are the key players in Lebanon. And Mr. Macron has made a lot of promises to Lebanon without really coming up to his promises. And we do not receive actually external support, even the World Bank. Presently, sorry, is abstaining from supporting, or if it's going to help, it's going to help the poorest class of the population. Good, fine, but through a loan. I mean, they could do a donation. The World Bank is very rich, or there is the AID, which gives loans to countries where the GDP per capita is very low. So nothing should prevent the World Bank to give at very low interest rates help to Lebanon. Now they want to help the poorest strata of the population, but Lebanon will have to pay an additional premium for this to the World Bank. Where are we? I mean, this is completely insane. On the other hand, we have also Saudi Arabia, which is a major player in Lebanon, that could be helpful, but we don't see anything coming. It seems that there is a kind of regional, international, I don't know, understanding behind the scene that no help should be given to Lebanon, except an IMF help, okay. And is Lebanon ready to support an IMF medicine? I am not so sure under the present condition. And then we might have today the private sector grabbing state properties at very low prices. This is what could happen very easily if Lebanon continues to, in French you say, aller à la dérive, go to the unknown, like a boat without direction. It's,
yeah, Hani,
it's amazing.
Yeah, let's give Hani a chance to comment on this, and what do you see in terms of the situation, economic situation? Because I mean, there is no way you could separate economics from politics, and there is no way one can deal with one system without invoking the relationship with the other. What's your
Atif, yesterday, the State Department made a statement regarding Syria and said that it's very disappointed there are countries that want to re-establish relations with Syria. So it's calling on other countries not to create relations with Syria. Now, this is a manifestation of the new world order that we have. It is showing in the crisis in Europe. it's showing in the new wars taking place, and it's showing in the Middle East. In our case, what we have seen in the last 2 years, especially, is the fragmentation of Arab societies and political orders in Arab countries. They're being fragmented. Even countries that we thought they moved into a democratic phase, liberalism, respect of individual opinions and group opinions, and what have you, such as Tunis, is fragmenting now. And it's coming back to a system which the head figure in the country plays a primary role. There's no liberalism anymore. There's no democracy anymore. Same thing is happening in Libya. They can't even agree to have elections in the country and elect a new parliament. They can't accept each other. Also in other countries, Iraq is in a fragmented position. Syria still has its own issues, and so is Lebanon. So,
And so is Palestine.
So we have the fragmentation of our societies, of our economies, and and one of the primary reasons is the new world order, which imposed by the U.S., where the U.S. acts as judge and jury. It decides what it wants of each country and tells it what it can and what it cannot do. This is strange. This is unbelievable. Since the Second World War, we've never seen a phase like this as we are seeing today. And it's imposing its will throughout the Arab world. Now, as I said, part of it we are responsible for because of our fragmentation, our lack of institutions. Even Egypt, the largest country, is now experiencing serious economic and financial hardships. And where do we go from here? All you have is a few small countries in the Gulf that produce petrochemicals and sell it on the world market. But that's not sufficient. You now have over 400 million in the Arab world. What happens to the other 350 or 60 million Arabs outside the Gulf countries? The economic case is not very promising in the immediate future.
Not at all. Actually, one thing the American people need to understand, and maybe have not been given the information, these sanctions that the US, like the Caesar, they are exacting very heavy price, very heavy damage to civil society, to the poor people. I mean, if they are
please, let us not forget what they did in Latin America, what they did in Chile, the way they killed the legitimate democratic president of Chile. This was something absolutely incredible. What they did in Argentina also. I mean, the American policies, in my view, are criminal policies. They're not in any way policies that reflect the internal democracy of the US. No, democracy stops at the borders of the United States, and then for the rest of the world, it's kicking any head of state which is not in their which is not a client of them.
Yeah, the sad situation, and I'd like Hani to comment on this, that 97% of all these sanctions and all these regimes and imposition of penalties on countries, hoping that they would change their policies, would accommodate more the US, have failed. There isn't really a single example where these sanctions have brought about the desired objectives of those who promoted them. And if they really were targeting, as they always say, the ruling elites, the poor people who suffered for it. The leaders have not really felt the pinches and the penalties and the pains. It's the people who become hungry, who lose their livelihood, who lose their chances of improvement and receive the social services and benefit from the social safety net. Okay, the story is absolutely disastrous. You know, if I want to send today money to Syria, for example, there isn't a place a bank would really take the money from me. I mean, if they want the Syrians to buy medicine, you know, to deal with the COVID pandemic, they were unable. It is absolutely and totally disastrous in terms of the pain and the results and the outcomes. Okay, Hani, what's your view of this?
Atif, after the Second World War, a new system was created. They had experienced, Europe and the world had experienced the First and Second World Wars, and hundreds of millions paid with their lives and the destruction of societies. So supposedly we started a new era and we established international institutions. That's when the United Nations came into being. And everyone participated, including some figures from Lebanon, as you know, in the founding of a new charter and the new institutions. But then what happened? The UN now has no role to play. It's not allowed to have a role. Now it is decided by the one superior country, economically superior and militarily superior, the United States. And it decides what's to be done, who is to do what, and who cannot do what the policies they want to impose. So you are going to experience, especially given the instability of the US political order itself and its own economic system and the problems. You and I live in North America, and we experience it on a daily basis, the instability of the American regime, which is reflecting in its foreign policy on the rest of the world, and especially on weaker regions like the Middle East. We are, in a sense, the subject of a new policy which wants to impose its will on us, whether be it on who we can have relations with, who we cannot, what we can export, what we cannot, what relations we should have, what policies to adopt. And this is what's happening. Syria is paying the price, Iraq is paying a price, Algeria is paying a price, and the rest are trying to get by keeping calm and quiet. So yes, on a multiple level, our region is going to see a lot of hardships in the coming year or two, be it on the issue of Palestine, be it on Israeli-Arab relations, what's happening in the Israeli-Lebanese relationship and the Syrian relationship. Look, the two major civilian airports that Syria had are out of work, out of function. They destroyed them, and nobody said a word. Security Council didn't meet, didn't consider, didn't condemn the Israeli action. So what more can they do? Now, will there be an Israeli attack in the next year on Lebanon? You know, I consider this a possibility, a major possibility. Let's not neglect it. I think, as you all know, Israel doesn't bear any party, whether it's a state or a movement or whoever group is, to threaten its control. or to defy its will. So if the Israelis do attack Lebanon within the next year, we're gonna pay a very heavy price. And do we have the means to repel it? This is what we should focus on, what the Arabs should focus on, what Lebanon should focus on, not to sit and bicker on stupid small issues between petty statesmen. I wouldn't call them statesmen, politicians, and neglect the danger to which Lebanon is exposed, and so is Syria, and so is Jordan.
Absolutely. The story is that we are entering 2023 with tremendous number of challenges. I mean, you already discussed the Israeli challenge, especially Israel moving to the right and having a very racist and very destructive and unrestrained government, and is likely to upset whatever stability there is, and God knows in what direction that violence it needs will be used. There are 5 major issues that is compounding this. One is the war in Europe.
Ukraine.
The region, without exception, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, they're all importers of food, particularly grain that used to come from Russia and the Ukraine, 50% to 60%, if not more. And now this supply is in question. So there is really a situation where we might be suffering hunger. Some people have already pointed out that there are really some major challenges in terms of providing food to the majority of people. The second thing is that the world is so uncertain. To what extent can we rule out a larger escalation confrontation? On top of this, we have an inflation that had come from so many other reasons, one of which is the war, but also to some extent was some wrong monetary policies that have been practiced by the central banks of the advanced countries. Today, the inflation rates, especially in food, is making it a burden even on the advanced countries. But look at what's happening in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Egypt, others. The collapse of the Egyptian pound is in no way unrelated to the issues of food security and the provision of food from outside. And then there is the climate change, and God, this region is likely to be one that would suffer measurably and extensively, and there could be quite a bit of change. So the story is that a region that is absolutely facing some very serious, critical, existential problems, instead of trying to deal with them, we are witnessing a world order that is stoking the fires, throwing gasoline on the fire. To what extent can we change the situation? To what extent can we bring some rationality to this issue? To what extent can we bring humanity to the way we deal with these things? George?
Well, unfortunately, international politics has nothing to do with being humanistic. If you take the big power policies, they don't have any consideration to kind. It is just a chess game between big powers, between themselves. Okay, today what is interesting is the fact that you have the group of former developing countries, with India being as a locomotive, India is playing a very big role. And you have China. China is a new, very big player in international order. This idea of reconstituting the road silk, the Silk Road in the world is very interesting and challenging. Of course, China is being criticized by Western interests very, very heavily. But up to now, in my view, I haven't seen that China is doing harm to the developing countries. In my view, on the contrary, and re-establishing the road silk will benefit a lot of countries all along the road. So this is a new factor. On the other hand, also, I still see, for instance, a country like Indonesia is a model of coexistence between so many different religions. My God, we Lebanese, we tend to see ourselves as a model of peaceful coexistence between different religions, but we're nothing compared to Singapore or compared to Indonesia, when you have Buddhists, or you have Christian, Muslim, Hinduist, so we're nothing. And in Lebanon recently, I gave a conference about النرجسية اللبنانية, the
Narcissistic Lebanon.
narcissistic
Lebanon.
The narcissist, the Lebanese narcissist, as is no other country in the world, has religious pluralism. Our pluralism is nothing compared to Singapore or to Indonesia. Nothing, absolutely nothing. It's, and I visited Indonesia in the past. It's something extraordinary. There you have so many different religions, and it's a stable country. It's a country developing fast. It's and here, I mean, we are focused in this region on the relation between Christian and Muslims all the time. Does it make sense? Christian and Muslims have been living together since the day of the Prophet. So we are discussing issues that shouldn't be discussed, because as if it's just in the last century that we had to live together with Muslims. The Christian had to live together with Muslims. That's completely stupid. But remember, France wanted to split more Syria. When France was nominated by the Société des Nations as having a mandate on Syria, they immediately created the Alawite state, a Druze state, two Muslim states, and they were on the verge of establishing a Christian state in the region of in the north, on the borders with Turkey. And in fact, what France did, which was a crime, France gave the region where all Christianity has developed, which is the Liwa Iskandaruna. I just give it to Turkey. Something totally incredible and against international law and unbelievable, like Great Britain, which gave Palestine to the Zionists. So these are policies that you never see discussed or denounced or criticized heavily. These are policies that we should keep on repeating. These were criminal policies.
Absolutely. Look, Hani, I'd like to take one position here and see if you can respond to it. Some people have argued that the war in the Ukraine has saved this region from another war, in the sense that the Americans are too busy with the Ukraine and weakening Russia. They don't want a new battle, and therefore the Middle East would have a relatively stable thing. There's some people really saying that the whole world order has been shaken by this war, and that the possibility of other wars are more likely now than last. Where do you stand on this?
I guess it depends on the region and depends on the interests of the major powers, especially the US. So in a case like the Middle East, we still have a situation where the West does not want to share the resources of the area with other major powers, and will fight for it, will make sure that it does not happen. In the case of Ukraine, as you know, what's the US doing in Ukraine on the borders of Russia? What's it doing in the Baltic Seas, three Baltic states at the borders of Russia? When you come to think of it, there is an attempt at encircling Russia and basically weakening the political structure in Russia. Will it do that in the Middle East? Of course it will do that. We are weak countries. We are fragmented countries. We don't have the framework to coordinate policies and mobilize together. So we are a weak region, and therefore nature doesn't like vacuum. And where there is vacuum, there are forces that arise that want to fill the vacuum. And the Middle East is a vacuum. There is a big vacuum. And be it the Israelis or be it the Americans, they are trying to fulfill it with their own power and control of the area. So since we're talking about a new year, 2023, and maybe the year after that, what I'd like to emphasize to our viewers is that it's a time full of contradictions, inconsistencies, dangers, instabilities. We need to be aware of that. We need to prepare ourselves for that, and we need to see what it is we can do to belittle the effect of these dangers on our societies. I mean, isn't it enough that the Middle East now, especially the Arab world, has circles, multiple circles that compete with each other and betray each other and attack each other. So when I want to blame Israel and blame the US, well, I understand what they're doing. They're trying to expand their influence, their power in the area, and their control of the area. But what is our excuse for allowing this to happen? My fear is that our elite, political elite, the ruling circles, are in a different world than their societies. And they don't seem to have any scruples about coordinating, aligning themselves with outsiders in order to maintain their own rule. There's no other reason, there's no other explanation. So we need to be aware and to find out how we can spare ourselves from what seems to be coming. Remember, there was a time when someone like Madeleine Albright is telling a journalist, it's okay if 500,000 Iraqi children die, as long as we can destroy this regime. Now, she's willing to give up 500,000 Arab Iraqi children. They can be Palestinian children, they can be Lebanese children. There's no difference. And they're willing to spare with them. So it's again, it needs further reflection, it needs further planning. Hopefully, there's a light in certain areas, in certain quarters, that could become a magnet for bringing in people together and redirecting our political life.
Yeah, if I were to summarize the discussion, this excellent discussion that we've been through here, we're not very optimistic about the future. In some sense, this 2023 is not going to look different than 2022. And if anything, it could be worse. And there are many challenges that have not been dealt with. And to some extent, we have a choice here. If I read you well, that to some extent, those who run the world order are not prepared, are not willing to accommodate the need, the aspirations, the recognition of the sacrifices and pain of the people of the Middle East. If anything, they seem to think that they can extract more concessions and more submission. So the story is not really that hopeful. But there are some, and I don't like to end up on a pessimistic things, there are some bright spots, one of which is what Dr. George had just said, that the resistance of the Palestinian people in the face of odds that are totally and heavily favoring their opponents is legendary. And to a great extent, the willingness of the people to stand up for their rights is not going to be dismissed easily. And that these Palestinians have proven time and time again, they're not going to surrender their right to a life, to a future where they have independence, freedom, self-determination. So to a great extent, as stark and as dark the situation looks, there are still spots, and that these will ultimately grow, and the will of the people will most probably prevail. I'd like to give you a chance, George and Hani, if you want to add anything before we conclude.
Well, I would like to add that it was the U.S. Government policy to help develop all the Islamic fundamentalistic movement in the region. The Muslim Brotherhood were, in fact, manipulated by the US since the beginning, and they use it against, for instance, Nasser in Egypt. Nasser was a great Arab leader who acquired such an importance that it became priority number one for Great Britain to top him down. And at the time, the US had a good stand because it refused this attitude. Was it Kennedy? I've read that Kennedy and Nasser were discussing, not openly, but there was a dialogue between them to bring peace to the Middle East. And today we should denounce the US who continue to subsidize and to send arms to all the terrorist groups who claim that they defend Islam, which is a shame. I mean, to have such a panorama of the region. I mean, those who are destroying Islam are being dealt with in the media, in the Western media, as the defenders of Islam.
Hani, anything you want to conclude?
I just want to repeat what you said, that despite all the hardships and bleak currents that exist today that the Arabs face, there are still some bright spots. And there is still hope in the populace, in the masses, just like in the Arab Spring. Nobody expected it, never thought it could expand to cover the whole Arab world. And it did have the effect of voicing the will of the people. There is a chance that this might happen again. And with respect to what's happening in Palestine and in Jerusalem in specific, I want to remind you that there's a precedent to what Ben Gvir did, which is when Sharon went with hundreds of armed guards into the Aqsa Mosque and to the area, which he had no right to go into a Muslim religious centuries old a mosque. And what happened then? It took a few weeks, it took a few months before the second intifada happened. What's happening now is still what precedes the tempest, the storm. If this continues, if Ben Gvir continues with his rowdy behavior, I think you will see a new intifada in the West Bank.
Well, on this note, I would like to take a moment to thank my two distinguished guests, Dr. George Khurram and Dr. Hani Faris, for this insightful discussion, and thank the Arabic Hour for giving us a chance, and to promise that we will be convening again to discuss other issues.
Okay.
This, we bid you good.
Yes. Okay. Happy New Year again.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year to all of you.